what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Mean Streets. I'm Chris Meaney, at Chris Meaney here of FTN. Appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out. Yes, it has been a minute since we've had a Mean Streets episode. Been grinding over at SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio Channel 87. There daily, weekly, Monday to Friday from 1 to 3 Eastern. Myself, Dane Martinez, and Jake Seeley. You can always go back and listen on demand. If you have SiriusXM, you can go back and rewind the shows if you don't get them. But it's middle of August here. It is time to start pumping out some Mean Streets episodes. So subscribe to our FTN YouTube page, and we're going to roll out positions. We're starting here today with quarterbacks. I'm going to talk about my favorite quarterback targets, my rankings, tiers, strategy behind drafting quarterbacks in single quarterback leagues and SuperFlex leagues. So let's start here with my rankings. If you want everybody's rankings, you want projections, you want FTN. FTN 15 promo code for you. The Fantasy Football Plus package is fantastic. It has absolutely everything from cheat sheets and rankings for whatever format you play, all the tools, DVOA statistics, Stats Hub, Discord channel, absolutely everything to help you get set for your fantasy football draft. So let's get underway. You came here for the rankings, you came here for the strategy, and you came here for the tiers. And I'll share some of the projections as well, kind of show you, players maybe I'm a little higher on than ADP projections, players I'm a little bit lower on. So I will reference Underdog ADP and High Stakes NFFC ADP, both tools you can see daily. It's updated over at ftnfantasy.com. So no surprise here. Josh Allen up at the top, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. Those are my top three quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes is number 4, and I do believe he is in that first tier. But Patrick Mahomes did not have a fantastic fantasy season last year. He was 13th in fantasy points per game with 17. Lamar, Hurts, and Allen all had 20 plus. But we know that Mahomes has that ceiling still. I believe last year was an outlier campaign for Patrick Mahomes. Listen, the entire wide receiver room stunk, right? Outside of Rashee Rice, it wasn't great. They led the NFL in drops. It wasn't an explosive offense. There was a lot of screen passes. This year, the addition of Hollywood Brown, who is hurt now 4 to 6 weeks, but we should see him early on in the season. Don't think we'll see him week 1 against the Ravens when the season opens up September 5th, but we will see him eventually as the deep threat guy, Xavier Worthy as the explosive guy. I mean, fastest man alive at the combine. He's getting slightly overdrafted in redraft, but doesn't sound like Rashee Rice is going to be suspended this year. His court date is in mid-December. It could just happen next year. I don't know. It could happen towards the end of the season. But I have Patrick Mahomes here still in this range. I mean, because the ceiling is just so high. As for Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, I have nothing negative to say about these guys. In fact, I probably won't have many shares of the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks here on my list. Josh Allen is going roughly pick 32 in high stakes. He's got a min of 7, which means he's going in the first round. Keep in mind that's a 6-point passing format. The max is 53. Over at Underdog Fantasy, the ADP is 37.6. I just don't feel comfortable taking Josh Allen at the end of the second or end of the third. I would much rather take a running back or a wide receiver in my early rounds. There's just so much value at the quarterback position. Yes, it's so nice to have Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. That rushing floor is tremendous. All of those guys averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. Lamar Jackson, 20 points per game, MVP. Only 5 rushing touchdowns, only 5 goal line rushing attempts, and 1 rushing touchdown inside the 5. So it's not like Derrick Henry will steal a whole lot of what he's done. Henry's going to eat in that offense. Don't get me wrong. But the other guys in Jalen Hurts and Lamar and Josh Allen, these are the guys each had 15 rushing touchdowns. I expect that number to come down, right? Josh Allen, 23 fantasy points per game. Jalen Hurts, 21 fantasy points per game. You look at Josh Allen, roughly 80% of his end zone targets are gone. Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. This is roughly 1,900 yards gone. This offense turned into more of a run-heavy offense when Joe Brady took over, roughly week 11. They leaned a little bit on James Cook. I like Dalton Kincaid. I like Khalil Shakir. Keon Coleman should be a nice red zone target for Josh Allen. He's still going to run, and he probably still will live in the 8 to 10 rushing touchdown range. And Jalen Hurts may as well. With Kellen Moore there, I think we're going to see more motion. We've already starting to see that in camp. Devontae Smith has talked about it. Running backs like Saquon and even Will Shipley catching balls out of the backfield, maybe getting Dallas Goedert a little bit more involved. But the offense was very stale last year. The play calling was absolutely atrocious. And now you have Kellen Moore, and I think it'll be good for Jalen Hurts and others, especially Devontae Smith. I'm really in on Devontae this year. Let's move him around. Let's get him in the slot. He's a terrific route runner. Let's use these guys in motion. As for the tush push, right, the 15 rushing touchdowns, I expect that to come down as well. I still think they'll do the tush push, even without Jason Kelsey there under center. You still have Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata. You still have a lot on that left side of the line there where they can pull that off. But hey, they don't really need to. They have a guy in Saquon Barkley who's going to be better than DeAndre Swift. And this isn't a running back show. This is a quarterback show, but the offensive line is still going to be good, and they'll be able to lean on Saquon in short yardage situations and keep Jalen Hurts healthy. So those are my top 4 quarterbacks: Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes. And they're all in the first tier for me. Again, I probably won't have many shares of these guys. If they're falling, I did take Lamar Jackson in the high stakes draft that I streamed here on our YouTube page on Monday. It's because he fell. I think he may have fell to the 5th. And I was like, at this point, why not? But my strategy, I like to wait it out at the quarterback position. I would love to have a dual threat. Sure. Anthony Richardson isn't as high on my list as others, but I just like to live in the middle range or towards the end of my draft. One of the last managers to take a quarterback, Jake Seeley's Flex League, a couple weeks ago in New York, I was the last to take a quarterback. People were waiting at the quarterback position, and they were falling and they were falling. I was feel like no one was really going to take 2 within inside the first 10 rounds, and I don't think you should. If you're taking a Jalen Hurts, you're taking a Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, I wouldn't be taking a second quarterback. Even Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, I think he can roll with those guys. You want to take Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, maybe you back them up with a quarterback a little bit later on. Every format is different. Every setting is different. 14 teams, 16 teams, you're going to want to have a second quarterback. And I'm talking single quarterback only. SuperFlex gets different. You're going to have at least 3. You have to. You won't be able to compete. You got to make sure that your first 2 quarterbacks don't have the same bye week. And your quarterback 3 is somebody like Drake May, who may not start a game this season. So you just want to cover your bases in SuperFlex. And listen, we saw more than 60 starting quarterbacks last year in the NFL. So injuries are going to happen. If you're in a league where you have to start at least 2 quarterbacks, like the SuperFlex, that SuperFlex spot won't allow you to play a running back or a wide receiver or a tight end. It's strictly quarterback. You may want to have 4 quarterbacks, and you got to be aggressive, taking a couple in the first, I'd say 4 rounds. In SuperFlex leagues, if I'm picked 7 or 8, I'm probably taking a running back or a wide receiver, maybe a quarterback on the way back, or I'm living in a board 2 that I'll show you my quarterbacks between 13 and 24. If I'm in the first 5 picks, I probably will take, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love. I'm interested in those guys in SuperFlex if I'm picking at the beginning of the draft. But back to single quarterback leagues here, I just feel like the tier is so deep. Every year we see quarterbacks pop off. Last year, I was in on Brock Purdy and Jordan Love. These were guys that I was loving in SuperFlex leagues. Did all kinds of best ball drafts here. CJ Stroud was my most owned. Jordan Love was my second most owned. Brock Purdy was my third. Those are my guys because you can get them outside of round 12. Now, I didn't think that Love or Stroud would be as good as they were. Like, don't get me wrong. I wasn't expecting that. I did not think that they would be top 12 quarterbacks. I thought they would be serviceable SuperFlex quarterbacks. And we'll identify those guys in just a moment. But as you see, I am in on Stroud and I am in on Jordan Love. Now, CJ Stroud was getting drafted pretty early about a month ago. He was going ahead of Patrick Mahomes. I saw him as quarterback 3 in high stakes leagues. He was 9th in fantasy points per game. Again, overdrafted in May, but living in the 7, 8, 9 range here in quarterbacks off the board. In our projections, he is our leader in a lot of categories. You want to take a look at passing attempts, Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, these guys are all at the top of our board here for pass attempts and passing yards and passing touchdowns. CJ Stroud is inside the top 2 or 3 in just about every category. You add Stephon Diggs there. Nico Collins is an absolute stud. He broke out last year, and I'm buying the breakout. An upgrade at the running back position with Joe Mixon catching balls out of the backfield, and then Tank Dell, right? He's healthy. He scored a touchdown in preseason. So it was a fantastic season from CJ Stroud, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. But again, the book is out on him. Defenses will adjust. It's a first play schedule. There's some difficulties. There will be some more difficulties, I think, for him in year number 2, but I'm still, with the ranking, feel really good about him. Jordan Love is my guy. Jordan Love was, again, my guy last year. I'm not here to pat myself on the back. I didn't think he'd be that good. He's good, right? I'm buying absolutely everything that he was selling last year. He was quarterback 5 in fantasy points per game. He was the best quarterback in the NFL from week 11 on. He had a 31-11 touchdown interception ratio. He's second in touchdowns. Over that span from week 11 on, he was like 7-2. I think he had 1 interception. He had double-digit touchdowns. He had a stretch back-to-back weeks where he torched the Lions and he torched the Chiefs. In fact, he had the best QBR from week 11 on. He had the best QBR of any opposing quarterback against that Chiefs defense, which we know carried them to the Super Bowl. He was fantastic in the playoffs. He had the youngest wide receiver tight end room in football. So this is year 2 for Love as a starter, learning from LaFleur. Everybody else growing in the offense: Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Kraft and Musgrave. Josh Jacobs is an improvement out of the backfield, right? I mean, Aaron Jones was great down the stretch into the playoffs, but he couldn't stay healthy. There were times that they didn't even have a run game. I believe in Josh Jacobs. Last year, he's running into all kinds of stack boxes. He's just a couple years removed from leading the NFL in rushing yards when they had a capable quarterback who can move the ball. And Love is going to sling it around. It's very difficult for me to sit here and predict which wide receiver is going to be the guy from a week-to-week standpoint. It's going to be spread out. Love says Dontavian Wicks is going to have a monster season. If that's the case, Love's going to have a monster season. And I believe in Wicks. I think he's probably the best route runner of the 4. Jaden Reed, I think, is getting overdrafted. Christian Watson, you guys know I've been down this road before with Christian Watson. I still believe that ceiling is there. But the 2 guys that I want are Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks. Of course, the ADP, the cheaper ADP comes into play for me, but Doubs is the guy. Like he may not be the flashy type player, and the inconsistency was there in terms of targets, but air yard share, target share, end zone targets, red zone targets, touchdowns, led the Packers in all those categories. In the playoffs, he was really the only guy. I know they ran the ball a lot with Aaron Jones, but he was the guy in those 2 playoff games, dominated targets and yards and catches. Nobody else really showed up in those 2 playoff games. Jordan Love was leaning on him. So you don't have to draft Love this early. He is going 20, 30 picks after Anthony Richardson. He's going after Kyler, Joe Burrow. He's living in the quarterback 8, 9, 10 range. And again, that's where I like to live for my quarterback. I like to, hammer wide receivers early, get an anchor RB, live in the elite tight end range. If one of those quarterbacks like Lamar or Anthony Richardson fall down, I won't be afraid to take them. Getting that dual threat is nice. I still think Anthony Richardson's fairly raw as a passer. And of course, he had 4 rushing touchdowns in 4 games. It's an up-tempo offense with Shane Steichen. It's an improved offense. A.D. Mitchell going to see a lot of one-on-one. It's going to be his deep threat guy. Josh Downs, when he gets back and he's healthy, he's in the slot. Michael Pittman is the short and intermediate type back. And Richardson and Jonathan Taylor didn't play together last year. So they're going to run the football quite a bit. Up-tempo offense. Shane Steichen with his RPO. He's a terrific play caller. I don't mind Anthony Richardson. I just don't have him. I've seen him go ahead of Lamar Jackson in the 3rd round. I'm just not comfortable doing that. Give me another wide receiver. Give me my anchor running back. That's the way that I like to construct my squads, and I like to wait a little bit in the middle rounds for quarterbacks. You see Kyler here. I'm in on Kyler. Kyler in the year 2, year 3, 23 fantasy points per game, 21 fantasy points per game. He was running a lot those campaigns. He didn't run a whole lot last year. Came back from the injury. I thought he ran towards the end there, but those elite seasons, he was certainly living in the 800 range. We have him for roughly 500 rushing yards in our projections, roughly quarterback 8 here in fantasy points. But, those seasons where he was hitting his peak is because he had a stud like DeAndre Hopkins. And I'm not saying that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have a season like DeAndre Hopkins this year, but he has an alpha wide receiver that he can lean on. Trey McBride is kind of getting overdrafted as pick 45 on average, but he is a good player. And then I still believe like Michael Wilson can offer something. Greg Dortch at times. James Conner's a really good back. So I'm in on Kyler. Again, I like to live in this middle range. I'd say the quarterbacks that I have the most shares of in this range would be Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, and Brock Purdy. And you see here Joe Burrow at 9, Dak Prescott at 10. I'm a little bit lower than consensus on those two guys. Joe Burrow's fine. It's a pass happy offense right now. Jamar Chase is not with the squad. T. Higgins is. They lost the reliable third down wide receiver Tyler Boyd, who led the team in third down catches, and Joe Mixon catching balls out of the backfield. Chase Brown is very interesting in that role, catching balls out of the backfield. Burrow should pass the football a lot. It's a very tough division, and I'm a little concerned about the injuries. That's it. There's been a lot of injuries over the course of his career. The rushing upside is not totally there. Dak may be the biggest discount on here because the Cowboys showed me in the offseason that they just want to throw the football. Now, they need to sign CeeDee Lamb, figure it out. Dak is probably in his final year here in Dallas. Micah Parsons sees a contract. There's a lot of ways that this can go sour for Dallas this season. The schedule is much tougher. They beat up on a lot of weak teams at home last year. The schedule is tougher. It's a first place schedule. They open up on the road against Cleveland. They have the AFC North. They got Baltimore in the first couple weeks. Dak has struggled at times on the road, but they will chuck it a lot, right? Because again, they didn't do anything at the running back position. Zeke seems washed, catch a bunch of balls out of the backfield. Rico Dowdle, I'm not super excited about either of those guys. I think they're decent targets in round 10, 11 on your fantasy squad, but I don't think they're really going to move the needle for the Cowboys on the ground. Royce Freeman, nah. So I like Jake Ferguson, led all tight ends in targets last year. CeeDee Lamb on the field should be a target hog. He should get a lot of balls. But quarterback, Dak was quarterback 3 in fantasy points per game. So this may be, 4, 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns. He was first in touchdowns. He was first in completion percentage. But again, there's a lot of this is why there's a lot of depth at the position, good value at the position. You could wait until round 8 or 9 and take Dak Prescott as your QB1, and I would be perfectly fine with that. Brock Purdy was a little bit higher, but I'm starting to believe that, hey man, Brandon Ayuk may just get traded. Brock Purdy was quarterback 7 in points per game. And this is really his first camp as QB1. Last year, he was dealing with the elbow injury. A couple years ago, it was Jimmy G, and he took over. And then last year, if you remember, people were talking about Trey Lance before he was traded to the Dallas Cowboys. And he answered any question that you had for him, right? He was among the leaders in quarterback percentage, yards per attempt, number 1, touchdowns, number 3. He was a stud, and Shanahan's a stud, and he's got all kinds of playmakers around him. So there's a lot to like about Brock Purdy in this offense. He ran a little bit in the playoffs. It's not his thing. He could run here and there. I think quarterbacks just tend to run a little bit more in the postseason. But if Brandon Ayuk gets traded, it would hurt Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy, it would hurt him because Ayuk led the team in yards and catches and touchdowns. And, Deebo Samuel is going to miss a game or two. When Deebo missed last year and Trent Williams missed last year, it was not a good recipe for Brock Purdy. They still have a lot there, like Deebo and Kittle and CMC. Heck, Juwan Jennings probably show up here and there. Ricky Pearsall. They drafted all kinds of skilled players this past year, but I do believe it would hurt him. I have a lot of shares of Brock Purdy. I've been taking him as my last quarterback. I've been the last manager for the most part in drafts, taking him in single quarterback leagues as my QB1. It could bite me with the loss of Ayuk if that does happen. Hey, if not, then boom. I think you have a quarterback again that could finish inside the top 5 in fantasy points per game. That's why this tier for me with Stroud, Love, Richardson, Kyler, Burrow, Dak, and Purdy, I put them all in the same tier. The upper tier for Stroud and Love. I just like some pocket passers. Both of those guys can run. Jordan Love's a little sneaky on the ground. Anthony Richardson's going to come with the floor, but will he have a ton of high ceiling games? He probably needs to have, a rushing touchdown along with a passing touchdown to get that done. He certainly could. And then, the pocket passers and Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott and Brock Purdy there at the end. Number 12 you see on this board, if you're hanging out with me on our YouTube page, is Jaden Daniels. So Jaden Daniels I think his ADP should be a lot closer to Anthony Richardson. I think they both have the same rushing ceiling, and that's 800 rushing yards. Anthony Richardson we have him projected for 8 rushing touchdowns, and I think we have Jaden Daniels projected for 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns. That's the biggest difference in our projections. We both have these guys throwing roughly 20 passing touchdowns, not 4,000 passing yards. I think the appeal, of course, is that we saw parts of 4 games with Anthony Richardson, and he was lighting the world on fire, 18 fantasy points per game, and you could see the rushing upside. I think he needs to protect himself a little bit, and they will lean on Jonathan Taylor a bit more, but you also have Steichen, and you have a couple appealing, options in the passing game there, plus, Jonathan Taylor. So the offense is probably going to be a little bit better, but listen, Jaden Daniels can run. We saw a quarterback design run for a touchdown in the first preseason game. We saw a nice deep ball to Diami Brown on the sidelines. He's got the arm strength. He has the accuracy. So I am in on Jaden Daniels, and I think you can take him. I've seen some high stakes drafts and some industry drafts where he's actually like a round after Anthony Richardson. So the gap is pretty narrow in those formats, but you're drafting with your buddies and Yahoo, ESPN Sleeper. I would say that Jaden Daniels may even go undrafted. He may be outside of quarterback 12 or 13. I think you can wait on him. You can take him, towards the end of your draft. Maybe you pair him up with a Jared Goff or a Kirk Cousins or, an Aaron Rodgers, a Matthew Stafford, somebody who is a little bit more stable. I know some of those guys are coming off Achilles injuries, but you could just roll with the other guy because that's what our strategy was last year. Hey, you want to draft Anthony Richardson as quarterback 8 and 9? Go for it. But pair him up with somebody else. Pair him up with a Jared Goff, and look how that would have turned out. Oh, wow, I'm going to roll Anthony Richardson. You have Goff as a little bit of a backup just in case, rookie quarterbacks after all. But I think he's going to run. Let's see the projection here that we have in terms of rushing. I just want to be on point when it comes to the exact projection we have and just kind of show you guys. So we have Lamar at 773. We have Anthony Richardson at 607, Jalen Hurts at 575, and Jaden Daniels at 550. So we have him for more rushing yards than Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, 400-ish rushing yards for DJ, and just behind Jalen Hurts. So a really good running quarterback. I think he had like over 1,000 yards in each of his last 2 years. And I think he's a better decision maker, and I think he's got a better arm than Anthony Richardson. So that's the biggest, difference, I think, in ADP. I'm a little bit more bullish on Jordan Love. Anthony Richardson, I think, is going slightly high, but I totally get it. I understand it. I'm just more willing to take a running back or a wide receiver and take the value in Love. And then Jaden Daniels here, I like a little bit more than the consensus, but not too much more because over at Underdog Fantasy, Jaden Daniels is quarterback 12 and Jordan Love is quarterback 9. And we have Anthony Richardson there as quarterback 5, pick 55 on average. So again, like 40 picks later, you can get Jordan Love. 50 plus picks later, you can get a guy like Jaden Daniels, and heck, 65 picks later, you can get a guy like Brock Purdy, who's fallen to quarterback 14. Here's the second board. I won't spend too much time on this, but Jared Goff, man, I really wanted to put him higher over the last 2 years. He's second and third in passing touchdowns and passing yards. It's the whole band is back together. Inside a dome. They play inside a dome 14 times this year. Most of Jared Goff's road games are in a dome, which is, you look at the home and away splits for Jared Goff over the last couple of years, and they're significant. So in a dome, I think the playoff schedule is difficult. There's some outdoor games there, but I believe in Amon-Ra and Laporta and Gibbs and Montgomery, and I believe in the breakout campaign we're going to see from Jamison Williams. So I think Jared Goff is another guy that you could wait and pick last, and I would be comfortable with him as my quarterback 1. I really would. I don't think he has the same upside clearly as some of those other guys on board number 1. But Jared Goff is he's capable to be being your starting quarterback, and you can really just stockpile some wide receivers and running backs and live with Jared Goff. I really truly believe that. Jared Goff was roughly, let me see here, I got it, fantasy points per game. Jared Goff was quarterback 15. I mean, he's right there with Mahomes and, Fields and Herbert in around that range. Russell Wilson had a good season last year. Kyler, by the way, 18 fantasy points per game in just those 8 games. So I like Jared Goff as a target. Caleb Williams, there's a little bit of risk here, but you could take Caleb Williams and then maybe a Matthew Stafford at the end of your draft, maybe a Kirk Cousins, maybe an Aaron Rodgers and go that way. I mean, you guys all know, you're aware of this. There isn't a quarterback I can remember first overall set up like this, right? Because it was Carolina's pick. It wasn't Chicago's pick. It's set up perfectly. DJ Moore had a breakout campaign last year with Justin Fields. You bring in Keenan Allen, veteran wide receiver. You have DeAndre Swift catching balls out of the backfield, which didn't happen last year really with Philly, and I think it will in Chicago this year. And then you got Rome Odunze, right? I think he's a fade and redraft this year, but those guys are going to score a lot of touchdowns together. It reminds me of Mike Evans. Just throw it up and let him go get it. Big body. And Cole Kmet, as a tight end too. And you could see the poise in the pocket in the first preseason game. You could see, the rollout ability and throwing it on the run, on the numbers, the arm strength, the accuracy to Cole Kmet. He can drop it in a bucket. The flick that he had to Swift, it was kind of Patrick Mahomes-like. It really was. It was like a sidearm flip. I didn't even know he was like kind of looking that way, and he just flipped it over to Swift. So all the tools, he has them all. And I don't think he's going to be super aggressive and chucking it down the field like he did in the last year at USC. I think the defense kind of let him down. He was forcing some things, but uh, listen, I think you can, another guy that you can maybe get away with being your QB1, and you kind of play the matchups and see how it rolls. But uh, Caleb Williams there at 14 for me. Trevor Lawrence, Tua. These guys are in the same tier. Goff, Williams, Lawrence, Tua, and Stafford and Cousins. And I'd kind of draw the line there. I guess I'm a little sour on Justin Herbert this year. He's already dealing with plantar fasciitis. All of his weapons are gone. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Gerald Everett. It's going to be a run first offense. He can run. I think, my thinking about a month ago is like, Justin Herbert may set records for himself this year in rushing attempts and rushing yards with Harbaugh and Roman. They want to run the football, and Kaepernick ran the football well. So all those years, and, they bring in J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Roman's familiar with those guys from Baltimore. I do believe that they're going to be a run first attack. And I love Ladd McConkey. I think Palmer is underrated. And, I'm not in on Quentin Johnson. DJ Chark could be the deep threat guy there, but I'm not really in on Herbert, outside of top 12 in fantasy points per game last season, and like losing all those weapons. In the year before, he was like quarterback 17, 18 in fantasy points per game. So I think he's a really good real life quarterback. Makes for a good number 2 in Superflex, because we know that he can have some high ceiling games. There may be some inconsistency there in his game this year, but he's a fade for me in single quarterback leagues. But there is something to be said about value for getting somebody who has top 12 upside, because we've seen it as your number 2 in Superflex. But Trevor Lawrence, it's year 1 awful, year 2 step forward, year 3 2 steps back. Battled through some injuries for the first time in his career. I like the additions. I really like Brian Thomas Jr. led the nation in touchdowns last year, can blow the top off the defense. And then Gabe Davis. So last year, Calvin Ridley led the NFL in end zone targets. So you think a lot of targets to those two guys. Evan Ingram is his safety blanket, and then Christian Kirk. And there's some talk ETN's going to catch some more balls out of the backfield. Lawrence can run. He's a little sneaky on the ground. He can give you maybe 350 to 450 rushing yards. Maybe he runs a little bit more this year. I'm in on the bounce back. This time last year, he was like quarterback 8 or 9. Everyone was expecting that breakout, and he let everybody down. So there's value there. Tua may lead the league in passing yards again. He may be up there, near the top. I just don't see where the ceiling is with Tua. He doesn't run at all. 15.9 fantasy points per game last year, and he led the NFL with 4,600 passing yards. He had 29 touchdowns, but he still couldn't crack the top 15 in fantasy points per game. The schedule is brutal, especially to finish. We know that he struggles against defenses that can dial up pressure, and we know that he struggles in cold weather. That's just legit. That's a fact. We've seen it now multiple times. And you go take a look at Miami's schedule to wrap up the season. I think that they have like Cleveland outdoors, the Jets outdoors, and then some of their, games that are not in cold weather. They have the Texans and they have the 49ers. You got to get to the playoffs first. But I'll tell you what, it's a really, really tough schedule that Miami has towards the end of the season. And I'm just out on a guy that really doesn't run. Kirk Cousins, right, coming off the Achilles, but he's going to be familiar with the system. Zach Robinson comes from Sean McVay's tree, and Kevin O'Connell did as well. I really do believe that Kyle Pitts and Drake London will be great this year. I think London's getting slightly overdrafted, but you look at Robinson and the wide receiver ones, and Puka and Cooper Kupp, and then you look at Justin Jefferson in the similar offense. They should feature Drake London. Kirk Cousins is an accurate quarterback. He really should help Drake London. Listen, they had 17 passing touchdowns last year in 17 games. The Falcons quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins had 18 in 8 games. I understand that he had better weapons than Justin Jefferson, but he should do wonders for Pitts and for Drake London. I think Kyle Pitts is a great target, going like 50, 60 picks after London. I think those guys are like 1A and 1B. Certainly a little bit of risk. I like Darnell Mooney as the deep threat guy there. These guys are kind of statues, getting a little bit older. Stafford already dealing with a hamstring injury. Is a number 2 in Superflex. I'm fine with it, right? Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Demarcus Robinson, Kyron catching balls out of the backfield. It's McVay 3 wide, pass happy. Stafford's been pass happy since he landed with the Rams. The guy here that I moved up, and maybe a little bullish because we heard JJ McCarthy is done for the season with a torn meniscus. I was a little hesitant to draft either of those guys. Same with the Pittsburgh guys. Same with the Raider guys, because I just don't know. I think we'll see both Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell. I think we'll see mostly Drake, Jacoby Brissett, not a whole lot of Drake May. I think we'll see Russell Wilson for most of the season unless things go really sour for Pittsburgh and he struggles, because the defense should keep him in every game, or an injury happens and Justin Fields gets in, and we know his upside is top 12 due to his rushing floor. But I tell you what, that Steelers schedule down the stretch is awful as well. Sam Darnold, now I'm in, because he's just going to start. Like, there's not that back of my head, like, oh, when does JJ McCarthy come in? Does he come in after the week 6 bye? Got Justin Jefferson. It looks like Jordan Addison survived a scary injury. TJ Hawkinson will come back at some point. And again, Kevin O'Connell, I believe in the play calling. And you know what? He may just lean on Justin Jefferson like Nick Mullins last year. Nick Mullins leaned on Justin Jefferson in the couple games that he started. Justin Jefferson had roughly like 350 yards in 2 games. He was awesome in those games. I think he had 181 yards and over 100 in the other one. And again, the play calling. Sam Darnold's decision making may not be good. He may throw a couple picks, but his arm is decent and he's got some weapons there. So I think he belongs in this tier. And again, maybe I'm a little bit bullish ahead of Rodgers and Watson and Mayfield. But I think that the situation is decent for him in Minnesota, the play calling. So now he is in that low end quarterback 2 range. Maybe he's your quarterback 3 in SuperFlex. He'll rise up draft boards now. He probably won't rise up this high. Baker Mayfield had that breakout campaign with Evans and Godwin. And, he was good down the stretch in fantasy. Dave Canales is gone. I don't think he'll do better than what he did, and he kind of lived in this range. Deshaun Watson, I haven't really seen it. I really should have Rodgers ahead of Watson, but Watson can run a little bit. And when he's been on the field in roughly the 12 games, he's been decent. Like, the offense has been decent as well. The yards per attempt, the rushing has been kind of there, but he'll never get back to Houston days. He's been hurt multiple times. He started the season without Chubb. I like that they bought low on Judy. You still have Cooper and Njoku, but I'm still not completely sold on Watson. And then Rodgers is a statue. We haven't seen him in a couple years. If he plays, he'll be great for Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall is going to catch a lot of balls to the backfield. The defense is going to be strong, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of high ceiling games from Aaron Rodgers. But I do think like Rodgers makes for a decent pairing with Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels, like, a quarterback that is a rookie or young that you're a little bit unsure of, and you can just ditch Rodgers if those guys are balling out the way that you think that they could. Will Levis is that guy on the way out. We'll wrap up here. I have him as quarterback 21. I have him the highest of anyone at FTN Fantasy. I could be wrong on him, sure. But this is the guy for me, just like Love was last year and Purdy was, as my breakout candidate. I think he's one of the biggest winners, like Bryce Young, bringing in Deontay Johnson and drafting some skilled players, Xavier Legette, Javian Sanders, Jonathan Brooks, but I still don't really fully believe in Young as a quarterback, and the play calling should be better with Canales. But I like Brian Callahan as a play caller. I thought he did some great things in Cincinnati over the years, changed the offense when Jake Browning took over for Joe Burrow, and he was great, man. Jake Browning checks a lot of boxes in terms of completion percentage, yards per attempt. He only played a handful of games. It was Callahan who kind of switched up the offense, made it simple with some RPOs. Callahan is great. He's done some good things with multiple quarterbacks. He's been around great quarterbacks, Manning and Stafford, and Derek Carr had a breakout campaign when those two were together. I just think that you add in Calvin Ridley, you have DeAndre Hopkins, you bring in Tyler Boyd, who's familiar with Callahan. I talked about him being the third down specialist there. You have 2 backs to the backfield in Spears and Pollard who can catch. I think it's going to be a fun offense. Will Levis is athletic too. He may be sneaky on the ground here and there. He did get a rushing touchdown in the first preseason game, but he's got a ton of weapons. And, he only had really one good fantasy game, but he really only had one good option to throw the football to last year in Hopkins. So I think Ridley and Boyd and Hopkins and Chigo Okonkwo, all these guys are good for his game. Don't be surprised if Will Levis is like a guy we're talking about midway through the season is like, hey, I'm going to start him this week in my single quarterback league. I got him ranked as like quarterback 12 or 13. I like this matchup. Again, maybe some inconsistencies there, but I think Callahan will put him into situations to have success. The Titans offense may be sneaky fun. Could be a DFS stack in games when they play, depending on the environment. But other guys outside of this range, I'm just not really in on. Bo Nix, I think, has won the job. They won't say it, but I don't think, he can run a little bit, but the ceiling is just capped with the lack of weapons. Derek Carr, Clint Kubiak, nice play caller, but, where's the ceiling, right? Ceiling's not too high. I would take him over Bryce Young. Daniel Jones, I dropped out of here when Sam Darnold, with the news with JJ McCarthy. Daniel Jones has Malik Neighbors, and he could run a ton. He could really finish as a top 20 quarterback, and I wouldn't be surprised due to the rushing. But just like, give me the upside of Will Levis, I think. I would just much rather have there Sam Darnold in a much better offense and better play callers and weapons surrounding those guys. Justin Fields is going as like quarterback 23, 24, but as I mentioned, I think Russell Wilson would get a majority of those starts. I think he's interesting in best ball. Maybe you take him as your third quarterback. I would like to sit here and say that Gardner Minshew is going to be the guy. And if Gardner Minshew was the guy with the Raiders, I would have him ranked roughly quarterback 25, 26 as a decent number 3 in Superflex. But they may say that they want to get another look at Aiden O'Connell. So that certainly could happen as well. And I think if you're Devontae Adams, you certainly want Gardner Minshew. Even though Connell will give him targets, and he did last year, I think Gardner Minshew would be better for his game. So all right, that's it. Hit me up. Any questions at Chris Meaney. We're going to keep the fantasy football videos coming, so make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube page, Mean Streets on iTunes and Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. And just leave a question at Chris Meaney on Twitter. The DMs are open. You want to leave a comment here in the comment section. I will address those comments, and I'll always circle back. So again, don't be afraid to wait at the quarterback position. There's a lot of value at the position. Make sure you get at least 3 quarterbacks in Superflex leagues. You can attack them early if you're earlier in your draft. You can wait a little bit to round 3, round 4, get some of those guys that I was talking about outside of, round 12, like a Jaden Daniels, a Jared Goff, maybe a Will Levis as your second or your third quarterback as a breakout candidate there. But my guy to own this year, I'm buying, is Jordan Love. I really am buying Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, a little bit of Jaden Daniels, and maybe a little bit of Caleb Williams in my life too. But I like to live in those middle ranges there. I like Kyler as well. All right, guys, thanks for taking the time to hang out, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.